Welcome to Energy Talks. My name is Charles Wanguhu. I'm the coordinator of the Kenya Civil Society platform on oil and gas. Energy Talks is part of the Uliza Usichezwe campaign by the platform to basically put as much solid information in the public sphere on the energy conversation in Kenya. Today I'm joined by Stephen Kuria. Stephen Kuria has an illustrious career in both oil and gas and mining. Today, he will be speaking to us both on mining and oil and gas in the sector in Kenya.
So thanks, Mr. Kuria, for joining us. If you could just start off by giving us a bit of a background on yourself. I know you have several years, over 18 years experience in mining. So if you could just give us a brief background about your professional experience that's relevant to extractives.
Right, thank you, Charles, and thank you for having me here. I really appreciate this. Extractive is an area I'm really passionate of globally and also in Kenya. My background in mining started almost like an accident. Me going to a place called Broome here in Western Australia. At that time, I was operating a business, import and export business from Kenya and around Africa to here in Australia. But I ended up in a place called Kimberley's. And then the people we are with said, all right, before you go back to Perth, why don't you have a look at how mining works? And I started from humble beginning. Once I was there, I realized it's very hard to operate my import business. At that time, I had about 7 shops here in Australia. So I decided to stay there and work in the industry. My first job was what they call a nipper, which really is someone who is a messenger in underground. And if you understand underground, you can go as much as 7 kilometers. You're sort of like mice working under the ground. So you must know the directions. And it's very difficult because there's no sign like you see on a traffic lights in Nairobi. So that's a fast.
So this was an underground mine. What were you mining?
We are mining zinc and lead, which is interesting combination because the lead dictate that you have to wash regularly because that's the lead you use in petrol, and you have to have a very rigorous health and safety procedures because after a while lead can kill you. It goes through your blood. So that's how I started with mining, and from that nipper background to now, obviously, these Australian realize you're educated, and then you go back to the second level, which they call charging, which is blasting the mine, and eventually I was promoted to a supervisor. At that time, I look at what was happening in the industry because it's very remote, and I thought I'd go back to school to do my master's. And when I went to do my master's, I thought, no, maybe I finish with this industry. But somehow the first company to poach for me or to come for me was a mining company called Barry Gold, which was the largest gold mining, still is, largest gold mining company in the world. And they realized that I had a unique skill, which no one had in the country at that time. And surprise, surprise, was Swahili, which I couldn't call myself that I speak Swahili like Mombassan and Tanzanian, but for Wazungus was good enough to help them with 6 mines they wanted to set up in Tanzania. So I became like the go-between Australia and Tanzania, not professionally, as well as helping some of the bottlenecks that they were facing because of the language barrier. From there, I worked for almost 6 years. Then I was called in to work for another company, which is owned by, is a JV between Barrick and a second largest tier company called Newmont. And it was in the largest mining open pit in the world, which is called Super Pit. And I became the manager there for a while, looking after maintenance. And that's when I decided to move to a better organization. And I joined a company called BHP. For those in Kenya who don't know what's BHP, because unless in Kenya you talk about UN, BHP make a profit, at that time made a profit of $25 billion USD. And it has all mining assets, including oil. And so it's quite diverse, a variety of products. So I was in charge of the nickel division, and I looked after that for a while. But entrepreneur in me came calling, and I started hearing that voice since 2007. And around 2010, I decided to set my own consulting company called A2E, or Accelerate to Excellence, to now give what I've learned back to the industry. But funny enough, my job started off working for oil and gas, because what we do is what we call business excellence, so ensuring that systems, processes, and people in organization, they work in harmony. So I work again for the largest oil and gas supplier called Baker Hughes, which is in Kenya now. And I consulted for them for almost 6 years. Before then, I also did other work for a company like Woodside, which we're still working for them now, and other small organizations. So looking at that operational excellence area.
So, Mr. Kuria, I mean, if you could link us now between your current organization A2E, and so you had this sort of varied experience in the private sector, both oil and gas and mining, and so bringing that to Kenya's sector, and Kenya's oil and gas sector is very new. I think you've mentioned both Woodside and Baker Hughes, who are in Kenya now. Can you tell us a bit more about how your organization works in that space?
Thank you. I was requested to come and help a company which you know very well called East African Portland, based in at the river. And that's my first time to look at coming to Kenya. Before was normal diaspora coming back home for Christmas. But this time I did work for them trying to improve that organization. Is at that time I realized the shortage of the mining skills, and also the industry was actually not really mature in that extent. So that's why I started by working for A2E. Then I realized that also we don't have much of skills, as I think I said that before. And despite consulting, I thought, having seen what I saw in Tanzania, is that better to empower our people in Kenya with skills. So that's when we opened a company called Australia Africa Energy and Mineral Institute. And that company have been training in Kenya since then, around 2014. And as you said earlier, Charles, we are the first company in Kenya to train pipeline welder in Kenya. And now we are training, again, for the first time, we are training the drillers for Kengen as we speak. So we continue putting that path. And as you know, Charles, we have also trained a lot of people in petroleum and in ketchup. And the passion for me in that is to ensure that we are not caught up the way I saw Tanzania being caught up with no skills. They are unable to negotiate. They don't understand the industry. So that's what I've been trying to empower our people. Now, to bring you back to the chairmanship, I think that's where you want me to head now, if I'm correct.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, before we move to the chairmanship, a big conversation ongoing at the moment is sort of energy transition, and sort of this shift away from fossil fuel use into more sort of renewable energy. And so I wanted you to talk about your chairmanship of the Mineral Rights Board in Kenya in that context of the energy transition, and the role that mining has to play if we're to shift our energy. At the moment, obviously, I mean, Kenya still has a huge volume of renewable energy already in the mix. But of course, there'll be a lot more required. And of course, the diesel still remains, occupies a space in our energy production. So, I mean, in your view and in your experience, what's the role of mining in the energy transition debate?
Charles, you cannot go to clean energy without mining. And as much as we want to think that we can just move completely, if you look at wind, the turbines and everything you make come from mining. If you go to Olkaria and look at those rigs that they are drilling and everything they support come from mining. So mining still play a very pivotal part to ensure that we transcend from just reliance of just a mineral to clean energy. I haven't mentioned lithium, which give us the batteries and everything else that you're using right now, computers and everything else. But in terms of the oil, here in Australia, there's a very big push of hydrogen. Which we are taking on now. Hydrogen is the next big thing because it's basically use the water. We are really moving away from oil. And I can guarantee you in the next 25 years, the oil price will drop very significantly. And so it's better for us, Kenyan, to sell quickly what we have for this current price. So, however, you cannot eliminate oil completely because some of us who go to church and sit on those plastic chairs, they rely on petrol, some and most other things like plastic bottles and all that come from petrochemicals. So we're not gonna get rid of it entirely, but definitely will become possibly fourth or fifth factor. What I didn't say, I also own a company called East African Oil and Gas, which do conferences here in Australia. And we have seen dramatical that before we used to have the first day is oil and gas, and then second day is renewable, and the third day was women in extractive. But now we have seen that this year we'll be starting with clean energy, followed by the oil. So you can see for sure the priority is gonna change as we move forward. So for Kenya, we need to move fairly quickly. As you see, some countries in Europe, they say they don't want oil, they want battery cars. So there is no need of importing those Mituba from Japan. We should be importing maybe those Mituba of electrical cars or the mix. We should also look at, we have a lot of geothermal. How do we tap that geothermal to be able to use in a vehicle? We have gas in Mandera, and we should look at that. How do we bottle those gas to be used in a taxi? The government should be making procedure, like I've seen now in the newspaper that we are launching those buses to transport people. In Australia, those gases are all clean energy. They use hydrogen. So anything that government drive should be actually used for clean energy.
So I think you made a good point. I mean, I think you sort of highlighted that the price of oil is likely to go down But at the moment, the price has actually, there's been a bit of an upsurge lately. I mean, I think it had almost collapsed completely, but now the price has gone up again. So given those levels, and given, yes, I mean, Kenya has some gas, but also has a bit of oil up north in Turkana. What is the best way of Kenya, utilizing its resources, with one eye on the fact that this industry might not exist, it's sort of in 20 years. So, I mean, how can Kenya monetize its current assets before the big shift?
Thank you. I think that's a very important point. And I personally think that we have lost a lot of time going back and forth on some of the small nitty-gritty. If you have oil, and as you know, when we started this, the oil was $100 a barrel. Now we're talking about 50. I haven't checked. But if you have a product and you want to sell it, you move when the market is right. So for us, what we should be doing is to trying to move those products as quick as possible at this current price. Obviously, I'm not saying we move without getting the value for it, but we have very smart people in Kenya I've met and be able to negotiate this in a world market. We should also increase the level of exploration that we are doing. And NOC should be reading that, not just waiting for international companies to come and drill, because as we see here in Australia, most exploration are done by small companies. And then the big companies like Woodside and the Total of the world usually come and take them. But there's no appetite now for those small companies. So the national oil would need to play a very pivotal part in exploration part, so that we can be able to remove what we have in the ground before the price start going down.
And that takes us very nicely into the next segment around local content. So if there's no international appetite for our oil and gas resources, and so we're saying at the moment the industry is skewed towards an international oil company that will come in, the international service providers, like you mentioned before, the Baker Hughes of these worlds, the Schlumberger and all these sort of bigger companies who we're reliant on them to bring both expertise and financing. Is there a different shift to monetize our resources, for example, through local content? I know this is an area that you've worked in for a long period of time now. So, I mean, if you could just tell us, I mean, is that the way Kenya should be going, sort of this shift towards more local content?
Absolutely, Charles. If you look at Geothermal, Geothermal now is fully operated by Kenyans. In fact, for the shortest period, Kengen is exporting the skills to Ethiopia, and I think they are also signing to go to the next country, to Djibouti. So we need to move very quickly with our local content. And local content is that first is the training which we have been doing, and ensuring our people that are well trained. And KETAP have done a good job on that, which we have been training, but it needs to be put on another level. The second is ensuring our people actually have practical skills. There's nothing better practical skills. What I saw in Kenya, we are sending people in Aberdeen study petroleum and JKUAT, but they can't really get their hands on drilling equipment. So we need to, now talking again about NOC, need to work in a way that is giving these young people opportunity to be involved in drilling, mud logging, and those processes. So local content is an area I'm very passionate of, because in the end, the international company can walk away. And we have seen Woodside were there in the first, I think from 70s. Shells was there in early days, and they walked away and they left everything on the ground. But if we have our own people operating, even if the oil price got to $30 a barrel or 20, we are using the local skills and local people. It doesn't matter. We can even supply our own services in Kenya. So that's also entail ensuring that companies come up quickly. We are talking about, you had heard in a lot of conferences, people saying, international company have to come and do the drilling. That's not the case. If you look at Jethamo, we are drilling ourselves. There is no any international companies doing that. So we need to encourage our own people, entrepreneur, to focus on this area, and that's involve a good education on what it is. That and last, and I think Charles, is the banking. When I had a company was asking to be financed for a league to go to Turkana, and most of the banks don't even know what the league is. So how do you finance something which you don't even know what is? So the work that you're doing, Charles, and others in Kenya is very critical to not only ensure that there's transparency and everything else, but also educate these local companies like Equity Bank to ensure that they understand what's need to be funded. Because we are seeing our own entrepreneurs doing very well in banking, and we can transition to other areas.
So do you see that as the transition that will transition to a more sort of local banks financing activity, including exploration, and again, the local content? I wanted you to speak a bit more because you mentioned one of the challenges that even the local universities are getting into training, for example, petroleum engineers, some of who we work with. But there's just not enough practical experience that they can gain in the sector. So you're getting a lot of petroleum engineers who have not, for example, experienced actually working on a rig or working on a production and exploration site. I mean, how do we address that challenge? And for government, how does government step in that space?
That's a very big challenge, and I hope people in JQuat don't throw a stone on me. But if you look at the structures of those two degrees, the petroleum training and also the mining training in Taveta, I have said this many times. I think JQuat in petroleum, they have 2 professors from Nigeria. And you also look at Taveta, there's not a lot of international knowledge that coming to that. But mainly, if you train mining in Australia, the second year you go underground mining, you go and work practical for a year. And the 4th year, you also become a supervisor. For us, we are just sending them, get a paper, and they come. So when they come, they have no practical skills. So for mining, I was advocating for the ministry to have what we call training mining. For instance, we can go places like Frostbar, mining half cross, and we can make it like a school where you put equipment and you put everything. So the student can come for a year and practice how to use those equipment. Because even if you want to become a manager for a mining company, you need to know how the trucks and equipments work. You need to know how geology work, and you need to know how to blast. So those are one of the areas which I've been really pushing in terms of the ministry to look at in terms of the training. For the oil and gas, obviously we had Taro, and I think a lot of students were coming out looking for position in Taro. They need to go out. They need to get out in Uganda, if that's the case. I'm sure they also be fighting for their local content. Go to Ghana, where we have some of the Kenyans as managers, and get that practical experience. That will be much better because we don't have many companies which are willing or have capacity to give us a practical experience, unless you're in downstream.
Yeah. So I mean, thanks, Stephen, for a lot of those insights. I mean, as you know, as a platform on oil and gas and as civil society, you mentioned also one of the key things that we're pushing for is transparency and accountability in the sector. As chairman of the Mineral Rights Board in Kenya, what do you see the role of the board is in that, in sort of providing some transparency and accountability in the mining licensing process?
That's a very interesting question, Charles. As you know, the struggle that we have in the ministry and this setup. When I was appointed for that position, that's the two things I talk about: transparency and accountability. Because as a regulator, if we can't enforce on that, it's very difficult for international companies to come. You don't know who can come and take your lease, and how politics it is in Kenya. I struggle with that battle. First of all, the way the Mineral Rights Board is set up is that is very embedded inside the ministry. Well, it should be authority that is driving those two things. However, we are working to convince our stakeholders that the Mineral Rights Board should be like IPRA, that regulate the mining industry. If you work under the ministry,
so beyond the licensing, to also provide oversight in the sector. So you prefer it to be a standalone regulator, yeah?
Absolutely, it has to be standalone like NEMA or Communication Authority, because right now, Charles, I can tell you, we don't have capacity to inspect and monitor whoever is mining in a country. In fact, we don't even have a vehicle. So if Charles is mining out there in Taveta, he can be guaranteed no one will come and bother them. They can do as much as you want. That include mining and also include ability for environmental management. So if there is authority that have like NEMA can go to the ground and ability to check, then that's very, very critical.
Yeah, thanks. And so I think as we come to the end, I just wanted for you to give us your parting shot. I mean, what is your outlook of the sector, and sort of what are your personal views? Are you optimistic?
Yes, Charles, I know you laugh on that. I have made a case in the last 1 year after looking at the data in the country. Mining can contribute to almost 12% of GDP of Kenya. That's a lot. Mining is the only industry in COVID have not been affected. In fact, we have done better. Mining in Australia have helped Australia economy to stand, and even as you speak, they are paying their citizens to stay home when COVID hit. So if we can do 12%, and then the last one, Charles, if you look at the Vision 2030, any of those things cannot be achieved without mining. If you look at a Big Four agenda, food security, you need a fertilizer, and we have prospects in the western part of Kenya. If you look at manufacturing, what can you manufacture without mining? If you look at housing, anything you construct come from mining. And universal healthcare. First, we need to eliminate use of mercury in places like Migori. And then second thing, some of the equipment are made like with the product we produce, especially where base resources produce, they come and make machines like MRI scheme. So mining play a very pivotal part in the Kenyan economy. However, if we look at it now, it's only contributed 0.8%. So what is it that we are not seeing? You know, what is it that Kenya cannot see that it can really change to be part of this? And for me, that's been my quest right here during COVID, is to walk into Treasury and show them that we can really produce this. But to do that, you need three things. You need to have a proper regulatory system. You need to have a good geodata, which allow you to have a good geology, show people geology on the ground, and you have to have a physical regime. And third, we can't forget our own people in Migori. Fourth, which is artisanal miner. We need to look after them, and we need to protect them, and we need to train them. Those four things are the one gonna change this sector. We are working on physical regime as we speak, and looking also in the mining act and also in artisanal mining behind the scene as a MRB or Mineral Rights Board.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kuria. I really appreciate you coming on our Energy Talks podcast. I'm sure we shall keep talking about the challenges that exist in the sector, and hope as key stakeholders in the field that we'll be able to partner together in terms of pushing forward to enable the country benefit sustainably from its natural resources. Thank you again.
Thank you.